Chapter 13. Continuity of Wisdom. The Dravidian monasteries are all managed along the same pattern as the Lemurian monasteries were, and since the central sun was their total everything, Shaivites of this time experienced the dissemination of Shiva's darshan more than any of the other great devas, teaching and keeping inner faculties open. The Shaivite monasteries in the early Dravidian era concerned themselves in bringing man forth from the animal kingdom, re-educating him in the rules of conduct and culture. This main concern, coupled with laying firm foundations of systems to preserve their heritage through the Kali Yuga, consumed their time. Shaivite gurus served according to the patterns set forth in early Lemurian history and ruled their monasteries, some of which became great universities. Carriers of the Shaivite darshan mingled freely with the masses, working with bands of unseen devas to alleviate veiling ignorance with rays of sustaining light. Hundreds each circle left the monastery and traveled to all parts of the globe, teaching, keeping open the inner faculties of the mind. Others of these teachers remained with their guru in the monastery, constantly working with and training monastics from the beginning to the most advanced areas of the various schools of philosophy that had accrued during the Yuga. To perpetuate this vast effort of education, following a pattern unique to this Yuga, when the guru finally left his physical body, all the advanced monastics left the monastery and wandered forth as teachers. He worked through them all simultaneously. They never gave forth teachings on their own while their guru lived in his human body, unless specifically sent on a mission to fulfill a certain task of this nature, during which time the guru worked closely with them. Great efforts of this type were employed to prevent instinctive tendencies inherent in the race at this time from arising within the monastic. Mission instructions from the guru. Each initiate received personal instructions for the duration of his life from his guru before he departed from physical form. This practice, and this alone, gave the Dravidian monastics great continuity in covering all areas of the planet that they were able to access with an equal dissemination of sustaining darshan and knowledge. For all gurus worked closely together with this end in view. When a guru dropped his physical form, our gurus now are the elders who lived, worked, and served in their original bodies in the Lemurian monasteries toward the end of the Treta Yuga. The great Shastras and Akashic libraries tell us. The guru was the one closest to the Mahadeva, and his instructions given to the monastics in his monasteries were regarded as final law by the devas working within and through each of his monasteries. Therefore, since the Shaivite guru polarized these devas to each of the individual monasteries when he kept his physical form, there was no need for monasteries, except for the ones that directly polarized the great darshan of the Mahadeva Shiva, and these became places of pilgrimage. The others were taken down, and the monastics scattered themselves according to the assignments granted them by him before he left. In the second world and in the third world, the guru himself, with the same band of devas, worked with and through each monastic and his individual assignment until he too dropped his physical form and joined the inner band of tireless workers. This is what occurred as a result of the vows given by the disciple upon entering the monastery. Continuity after a guru's departure. Each Shaivite guru is answerable to no one but himself, his guru on inner planes, and the deity within him. Therefore, each Dravidian Shaivite felt extremely close to his guru, and none of these gurus ever left their physical bodies at any other time than the right moment, according to the divine plan conceived within them in the third world. Therefore, the Dravidian Shaivite monasteries fulfilled their purposes when each guru had fulfilled his purpose, similar to parents who leave their physical bodies, and the children all leave the family home, finding ones of their own, then enter their spiritual, intellectual, and worldly experiences. Those close to the parents inwardly always try to live according to the principles and the culture imparted to them by their mother and father. Those demanding instinctive freedom ignore the inner dictates and feelings and transgress, for from the inner plane perspective in this yuga the guru can work more closely with the individual disciple who is separated from all the other disciples than in a collective group. While in his physical body he can work best with individuals and groups because he uses the group to catalyze the individual and the individual to catalyze the group. Sustaining the flow of darshan. Occasionally, when a guru leaves his physical body, even though he has given specific instructions, some of the monastics cleave together, and every effort is made by the deities and devas to separate them and send them on their respective ways to fulfill their destiny their guru has set forth for them. Many of them fulfill these instructions in secret and incognito, and others instructed and taught quite openly. Each pattern was clearly set, for after his initiation a new dharma began. This system of perpetuating the darshan through many constant separate channels fulfills the dharma accrued by the disciple before entering the monastery. It creates a new karma and forms a fine dharma after initiation, according to the Guru's instructions in the fulfillment of the great pattern manifest in the third world. Hence these great beings emerged from the monasteries and were never swayed by the conflicts and temptations they encountered, but quelled conflicts and turned the forces of temptation into the love of God and the desire to be one with Shiva. Thus our culture is sustained, and through the Kali Yuga great temples will mark the places where profound inner happenings occur, thus perpetuating the darshan accrued by the existence of these monasteries. Mendicants of the Kali Yuga. In the Kali Yuga there will be wandering monastics then, too, many of them the same souls as speak and teach now, but no one will listen to them. They will beg their food to embarrass and disturb the population by their presence, especially from the ones who will not give. Some of our gurus who are even now leaving their physical bodies will be among these beggars, knowing full well who they are long before they are recognized by the Shaivites attending to the great temples built upon the spots which are their monasteries now. Testers of the pilgrims. To prepare individual monastics for their eventual task of teaching, they will be sent forth as pilgrims, carrying the darshan from place to place. The testers of the pilgrims would be also sent to harass them and put temptations in their way, take their belongings, as well as to provide protection for them. These protectors and testers of the young Shaivites attempting to carry the darshan of the temple were highly skilled, some of them gurus themselves, instigators of new innovations, who did not had monasteries in our time. This is performed to bring forth the strong divine tendencies of the young monastics and strength to overcome their inherent instinctive weaknesses. These testers of the pilgrims were comparable to a band of monastic bandits, ever ready to help or harass, incognito and disguised. They often caused confusion great enough to sustain lengthy meditations in the monastic to gain his peace, and with renewed strength, and a strength and confidence he did not have before, he would proceed with the thread of darshan and draw it into a rivulet of power, dispelling darkness and ignorance wherever he went. This is our way in this yuga. Study of the body's 5 forces. The Dravidian monasteries developed around the 5 great forces of the physical body, following closely the pattern of the 4 divisions of Lemurian monasteries. We find this system to be understandable and easy to follow, as the study of the physical body was of paramount importance, as constant effort was made to keep the refinement process of it going at a faster rate than the heavy pulls of the Kali Yuga, even now being felt, causing animalistic drives to appear, whereas previously they could easily be transmuted. Research constantly went on in herbs and various kinds of healing potions, and the knowledge of the 5 great forces, like liquid bone flowing through the body, is quite common. The liquid bone appears in the second world as a solid and can be seen. There are 5 varieties of it, and it is constantly flowing through the inner ether. It is a carryover from the animal kingdom, and through refining its consistency through foods and the uses of various oils and different types of exercise with the physical body, a health and vigor and refinement and translucency of the physical body occurs. This is, of course, when all of these 5 flowing substances of liquid bone are in absolute rhythm, but when one of these flowing forces impinges itself upon another, pain occurs in the physical body. When oils and herbs are applied to adjust the liquid bone, the pain disappears. It is with this that research is constantly being done to set patterns to last through the Kali Yuga. Lord Subramaniam has given forth great knowledge from his libraries within the inner ether of the mind to aid in the refinement of the physical form, so that occasionally self will be realized on the planet now and again through the Kali Yuga. Adjusting the five winds. These five forces of liquid bone flow through the body as does the wind through the vegetation in the forests, as do thoughts through the mind, as does the basic emotion through the nerve system. Therefore they are called winds of the body. The darshan from our Lord Shiva can be received into the liquid bone substance of the five winds, and if they are ailing in pressures one upon the other, the power of the darshan received into and flowing through the winds adjusts them to a natural ebb and flow. For this to occur, the awareness of the individual is totally centered in feeling the Shiva darshan flow through the winds of his body for long enough periods of time so that the inner adjustments can occur, and even miraculous physical healings sometimes result. Focusing awareness in this way is similar to holding a crystal in a certain position before the sun, whereby it can intensify the heat and create fire. The sun shines forth its radiance, as does Shiva by his existence send forth his great darshan, but the crystal or the awareness channels the sun or the darshan and intensifies it to fulfill certain purposes. Through this means we are able to lift the physical body off the surface of the earth, as the pull of the inner gravity becomes stronger than that of the outer world. This is simply done through the adjustment of awareness of the Shiva darshan, coupled with several of these winds within the body. Our body in the second world is made up primarily of these five great winds, plus the life force itself, which enables us to fly through the inner atmosphere when not in the physical body. This power will exist in some through the Kali Yuga. Knowledge of sound formed a singular science in those early days. It was known then, what has been forgotten now, that everything has a sound, that even emotions create sounds that are heard by others. All through the Dvapara Yuga, devas of the inner world served and helped the inhabitants of this planet through birds. If one were ill, he could go into the forest, and by concentrating and riding awareness in on the tones of singing birds, the physical body would be healed. Meditation was performed for practical reasons, not only for self-realization, which was of utmost importance. Meditation drew one closer to the Satguru's mind and invoked the help of beings behind the veil between the two worlds. Meditation was pursued for healing, arts, culture, and myriads of other sciences of that day. Om. Now we are led to understand the origin of today's Shivacharyas and how they have come into power as Shiva's ordained priesthood. We also learn here of sound's potency, of the sacred order of magic makers, of the uh, Sapta Rishis and the many great souls who existed and still exist as great intelligences, lords of karma, makers of the future, gods of destiny, consciously guiding the evolution of mankind. Guru Deva. Chapter 14, Egoless Service. It was through the Dvapara Yuga that we began to learn to live on the planet quietly and productively, following closely the principles given to us by the first race of Lemurians and their predecessors to avoid catastrophe. We live in small groups. Each is totally self-contained. No one travels much from one group to the other, and these herds of people stay together, following closely also the pattern of the animal kingdom. Keeping the physical body active and alive was one of the major concerns. The prophets with advanced knowledge about the Kali Yuga warned that this complacent contentment would change later on in that Yuga, and vast groups of people would live together in their own kind of jungles. But now, if one is ill, he can go into the forest, and the sound of a bird, concentrated through one or more of the winds of his body, will heal him. As the light of the sun can be halted by a single leaf on a tree, the sound of a bird can penetrate to the second and into the third world if it carries man's awareness with it. The sacred science of sound. The devas work and serve and help us through birds all during this yuga, especially when the second world formed in greater and greater intensity. We relate to the animal kingdom and divanic world through sound as an everyday thing. The knowledge of sound is one of our sciences, and our writings are astute and thorough. Here now is a quote. Placing awareness into different currents of the body produces sound. This sound is inaudible but allows others to feel how you are faring. If someone is angry, their awareness is going through certain currents within them, and it is felt by others. It is noisy. Sound currents from the soul have a darshan that can be felt hundreds of miles away, even stronger than in their immediate vicinity. One can hear darshan with his inner ear. If one is able to hear the sound of darshan hundreds of miles away, he totally hears that sound with his inner ear. But if he is in the same area where the strong darshan is coming from, he might also hear the other sounds of that area, and the darshan would not be heard as strongly with his inner ear, as his outer ears are also active. Therefore the darshan would not be felt as strongly. A guru gives off his darshan as a certain sound. Therefore people can feel his darshan like a direct beam, for only one sound radiates out all over. Each guru has his own combination of tones, so their darshan can be distributed one from another. Being in complete harmony with the guru means hearing his darshan, being in tune with the power of his darshan, through which knowledge and unfoldment are given, and the individual is naturally stabilized. The four monastery groups. With this basic principle, our carriers of the darshan worked and served in the small communities when they left the monastery. The monasteries were arranged exactly as a physical body. Each group within it represented a wind of the body, the guru himself the fifth wind, the Akashic wind. The monastics of the Shaivite monasteries of the Dravidian era related to each other according to the flow of the wind of the total body of the monastery that they were in. They were naturally closer to those within the flow of the wind they were in, as they came from the same tribe, had the same skills, and served systematically and similarly in the same area throughout their lives. Each of the four groups within the Shaivite monasteries were careful not to press upon another group and cause pain and strain within the monastery, thus inhibiting the Shiva darshan which flowed through it out to the surrounding communities. Unfoldment, a byproduct of service. The attitude of the monastics at the end of the Dvapara Yuga is similar to the attitudes held toward the end of the Treta Yuga. They entered the monastery to serve their guru and help him fulfill his mission in the great interplanetary plan. Their personal evolution was intensified and procured only because of their selfless, egoless work. The Guru's mission was always the same, to establish many positive channels for the Shiva darshan to flow out and stabilize the mind flow in existing communities. This was done through divinic souls now inhabiting physical bodies made of meat and bone, who were able to channel this darshan through the various mind flows and structures, thus stabilizing each soul on this planet in his quest for self. Because of this, culture flourishes and new patterns are able to be set at the end of each yuga as guidelines for the next. Refining the physical form. To make ready to enter the Shaivite monastery, these divinic souls worked diligently to refine their external physical structure so that they, as the internal inhabitants of it, could escape from it while it slept. The monastery duplicated a form within an area of the newly formed second world, which formed an area comparable in vibration, structure, and action to that of the third world. It was through this new area of the second world, which existed in and around and through each monastery, that communication to the third world was able to continue. Only when they had actually accomplished this refining process of the external form were they admitted into the monastery. The yoga of being a pure channel. All of these monastics related one to another as divine beings did during the Sat Yuga. The only seniority was that of monastic age, and physical age being respected and appreciated in wisdom. Each potential skanda worked with uh, diligently with himself to be sure his motivation for entering a monastery was truly that of the old Lemurian monastics in the Treta Yuga, for he knew that divine unfoldment into the third world, knowledge, and the final realization of self would reward his having performed his divinic mission, and that only agony and mental remorse would accrue if indeed his motivation and refinement was not astute enough to be selfless enough to carry the force of darshan. For the monastics fear the rays of Shiva darshan, for this same force through the refined soul can heal and bless himself and others, but when animal motivations accrue and are not dismissed, that same force flowing through the bone marrow of his five winds will cut and heat and distress the nerve system. So he guards himself well by seeking his area of service within the monastery, outside its walls, or a respectful distance away, according to the nature of the animal instincts he has accrued and exhibits in his personal life and behavior, which according to our practices at this time must be dismissed through each one's building within himself a divinic channel strong enough to occasionally pierce into the third world. His yoking the three worlds together was performed by a system of skillful practices, both physical and mental, which will develop into great schools through the Kali Yuga, when our monasteries performing the functions that they are today will no longer exist. Seeking oneness with the Guru. Our gurus of this time set the pattern for each monastery, and each monastic carefully works out this pattern through all of its intricacies. Each one, therefore, works to weave his awareness into the same area that his guru is in, so that each area of the divine pattern of yoking the three worlds together at specific areas on the earth, and building within the second world a counterpart of the third, thus channeling the Shiva darshan through and out to dispel, break up, and destroy the darkness and confusions that are beginning to well up as the Kali Yuga approaches in all its imposing dimness, is accomplished. So each monastic in each monastery that a guru owns works intricately to weave his awareness with that of his guru, so that each pattern within the conglomerate of patterns grows simultaneously one with another. These patterns have been told to a guru by his guru, who educated his guru's guru in the intricacies of the mission. The Dravidian Shaivite monastics are but the helpers. Their rewards accrue as the pattern becomes fulfilled. Law 1. Obedience to the Guru. These Shaivite monastics are beings of momentum, having prepared themselves in the skills of refinement before entering the monastery. They full well know the impending problems of souls on this planet during the next yuga. They are inspiration itself, and their untiring loyalties to each of our many gurus are renewed each day by their service and responses to the direction given to them. They adhere to one vow over all others, the obedience to the guru. Feared and loved, extreme in their actions, such were the remarkable gurus of those days who held truth in the palm of their hand. They were magicians, mendicants, and monarchs. Some were seen dancing in wild ecstasy. Others wove intricate carpets by hand, then patiently unraveled them until only piles of yarn remained. A few consciously froze their bodies in remote glacial mountain caves, while others became lawmakers and kings, immersed in the world yet fully detached from it. These masters of the karmas on this planet and lords of dharma on all planets, where human types of evolution reside, met privately and unobtrusively by regular telepathic communication. At auspicious times they gathered in secret conclave in the inner worlds to guide humanity on the right path. Om. Orders of remarkable souls called rishis walked the earth in those days, knowers of the unknowable who held truth in the palm of their hand. Their behavior was not always understandable, so full of magic and divine capacity were they. Their purpose was to assist in the evolution of souls on this planet, which they did incarnation after incarnation. They met in council regularly in the second world. Guru Deva. Chapter 15. The Secret Order of Masters. Not all the gurus owned monasteries. There were others that banded together to perform a different kind of function. This is told of in our great Akashic volumes, but briefly. But in some small pamphlets there is elucidation of a secret order that not even interplane beings were totally aware of, except for the fact that each member of this order is known to be one another. These small but skillfully written pamphlets, carefully stored in the Akasha, explain the activities of many of the gurus who had many vast monasteries during the Treta Yuga, but now serve in a uniquely different way. Each has his own individual powers, siddhis, and uses them wisely for the good of all inhabitants on the planets. Rishis in all walks of life. Each was very individualistic. A few took unto themselves one or two disciples only. The others walked alone. They did not group together, but spread themselves equally apart over the surface of the planet. Each one, however, behaved and lived in a similar way as every other. They were absolutely unroutined and would move freely through the world, yet they followed a very strict sannyasin code, more strict than any other order. They would be the ones to establish the caste systems, some of the languages, or establish some temple deity. Some of these rishis were beggars, others kings on the side of the planet that did not disseminate the darshan through monasteries, and still others in the courts of kings as fools. They could be found in all walks of life, this order of sacred gurus, only known by the members included in it, who each one actually was. Through their great telepathic powers they met in council most regularly, in an area of the second world which they owned. Each one is very extreme in his actions. They were a very lonely type, yet were very busy and full of what they were doing. They were either loved, worshipped, or feared. Their purpose on the planet, after the dissolving of their monasteries at the end of the Treta Yuga, had been to set new patterns and innovative systems. Their help comes from the third world. They will persist through the Kali Yuga, living, dying, living again, moving from body to body, known by many who sense their existence as the body happens. Secret agents of the Lord Subramaniam. Some would perform magic. Others would materialize a physical body and step out of the second world, disguised as a monastic in one of the monasteries, harshly chastise one of the members, step behind a pillar, and disappear. Another would sit and carve a small statue, and then let it stand and make it grow big. Like this, they would do things backwards. There was a psychic game that involved seeing which pegs inserted in a box with holes at the top were longer than others. Instead of playing the game as it was supposed to be done, by breaking off the longer sticks, one of these rishis would break off all the short ones. Another would teach a lesson, would patiently loom an intricate pattern in a carpet, and then as patiently extract each thread until nothing appeared but a pile of used yarn. They will be the ones, some of them, in the Kali Yuga to establish a system of reincarnation which will be orderly and complete. Each group will work in harmony with all the others according to their mentality. Each one worked directly with Lord Subramaniam in setting patterns anew. They are his agents in a human birth. This was an order of the Kundalini, and their secrecy holds the power of it. Adjustments to sustain culture. They never met on the physical plane, for the kundalini of each of them is so strong that the force would become so great. Should they meet in the first world, it would prematurely excite kundalini power of all in the vicinity. If, to fulfill a certain mission given to them by the Lord, one of these rishis needed the full force of the power of the entire group, it would come to him as an avalanche, not as the gentle, flowing, sustaining darshan, but as the piercing fire of darshan. And in this way this mystical Shaivite band of rishis plunder through the hundreds of thousands of years from one yuga to the next, making the necessary changes and innovations masterfully and on time to perpetuate the culture, the life on this planet, to sustain the mission of all beings. Mankind's ancient guides. These were the leaders who brought to this planet these same beings in their etheric bodies eons of time ago. They received their training and did their sadhana outside this galaxy to prepare for this tedious mission. These were the ones that knew the nature and quality of each of our 4 yugas and what was involved within them. They were the first ones to realize that things were changing towards the decline of the Trita Yuga and problems were coming. This became cherished as secret knowledge, and in the first 3 yugas, the souls inhabiting the earth are basically to be content, and they could never conceive of life and existence being any other way. These rishis are to lead all deserving beings from this planet in the Sat-Shiva Yuga, thus completing their mission, distributing themselves globally. Some of them freeze their bodies in deep mountain caves in glacierous areas of the planet and act as a pulsating powerhouse of constant radiant darshan to fortify their individual darshan in another body that they are inhabiting. Early in this yuga, they lived high in all mountainous areas on this planet, so that when the condensation of our atmosphere formed great bodies of water that we could not traverse, they would be well situated to work in and among the inhabitants. In this way, they equally divided themselves around the planet. On the other side of the planet, some became kings, some lawmakers, and others founders of countries. On this side of the planet, those of them among us see to it in unseen ways that the monasteries persist in the same way they did during the Trita Yuga. Innovators, instigators of evolution. They assist with the evolutionary pattern of the inhabitants of this planet as parents assist and nurture their children to maturity. They carve the future as casually as one would cut a piece of fruit. Some are quiet on the inside of them and could hardly be felt. This other pamphlet explains, and others so fiercely and full of noise that it is difficult to be in their presence. This great power enables them to throw themselves totally, without reservation, into the fulfillment of their mission. That is why they never failed. They thought nothing of leaving their physical vehicle to decay when they were through with their particular assignment, and getting in another somewhere else on the planet to begin the next. When changing times persist, these rishis give explanation to our Shaivite priesthood in all the various monasteries. They do this in various unseen, overt, subtle, and sometimes upsetting ways. We take heed and begin to change our patterns through their instigation. The inhabitants surrounding our monasteries begin changing their patterns. Effects of the Kundalini force. This then explains the function of the Rishi Gurus of our time. They are now performing a great service in our monasteries, for many of the Shaivite monastics have done so well in their sadhana and austerities that the Kundalini force is dissolving and causing to disappear the physical bodies, and they are gently leaving the planet, having fulfilled their mission. Due to this same Kundalini force, the instinctive animal impulses are carving deep pits into the minds of the population, and whereas seasonal mating generally occurred, now it is almost daily for some. Our Rishi Gurus of this secret order appear to be realizing that few new monastics are qualifying themselves strongly enough to enter our monasteries, and that the population of our Shaivite priesthood is beginning to dwindle. Some of these rishis are even now supervising the closing of large monasteries and guiding the Shaivite monastics into new patterns. The closing of obsolete monasteries. When the population of a Shaivite monastery diminishes to the point where the monastics are unable to maintain the vibration of the constant flow of darshan along with their chores, a rishi comes to guide them into dismantling the monastery. The order, of course, comes from the guru himself. The rishi usually appears among the monastics themselves and helps implement this order. He stays with the project until the lake is created, forests are planted around it, and all of the monastics involved in the project are divided and moved to neighboring monasteries to increase their population. Future orders, temples, and monasteries. Our Shastric manuscripts tell us this will continue until there are only a few monasteries left, and then the rishis will have some Shaivite monastics that are left mate and reproduce themselves, causing a new priesthood that will perpetuate the temples that they will found during the Kali Yuga. It is this priesthood that will carry on the Shaivite tradition through the process of reincarnation into itself through the process of mating and raising families and serving the deity and the temple as an occupation. It will not be until the end of the Kali Yuga that a new Shaivite order, similar to the Lemurian order of the Treta Yuga, will appear to fulfill the purpose of holding the vibration and darshan of Lord Shiva strong and steady, during which time a new culture, a revival of the original culture, will arise among the population that surrounds those monasteries. It will be the time that the last few monasteries became temples under this new priesthood, and the first being destroys the body of another being that the Kali Yuga will have begun. The Rishi mission is immutable. And in conclusion, the mission for the order of rishis was set for these 4 yugas. The pattern has never changed and never will. No one has ever joined it since its original conception, nor will any one of them depart from the others. It is stated at the end of this little pamphlet. Mating instincts and encounters were known to profoundly affect a seeker's journey and were assessed in detail. Brahmacharya continence started at the last mating experience. To facilitate healing of the inner bodies distraught through mating, Raja Yoga meditation and Bhakti Yoga were performed. New monastics who were virgins, Naishtika, cared for the animals, picked food, and prepared prasadam in huge vats. Those who had mated and perhaps lost their spouse worked in the fields as physical tests softened the process of Brahmacharya. Monasteries enshrined Shiva, Nataraja, and other gods such as Ganesha. 2 kinds of ceremony predominated, one quiet and meditative, and the other akin to today's puja rites. Potential monastics were trained in the homes of mature celibate families. All patterns of constant mating arrived, bringing with them the loss of harmony in family. The knowledge of sexual forces and their restraint evolved. A new science called yoga emerged to enhance their abilities and continue their spiritual unfoldment on the path through the Kali Yuga until the next Sat Shiva Yuga blossomed. Patterns were unfolded for those who had mated as well as for those who never had. Gurudeva. Chapter 16. The Yoga of Celibacy. The monastics of this era followed closely the pattern of the Lemurians in the Treta Yuga in working within the general activity, never putting forward any bit of their personality. Though they sought oneness with whomever they came in contact, they were always conscious, as fine Shaivites, that the great darshan of Shiva, the primal, all-pervading force of this universe and the next, flowed through all and all alike. So they sought complete annihilation of the ego to be the perfect channel of this darshan, guiding from behind the scenes. They were always trying to please their guru and the devas in the second world on the inside of their mind by performing all worldly tasks exceedingly well. As Shaivite monastics, they worked strictly behind the scenes of external life, leaving all overt activity to the brahmachari family men who were responsible to disseminate the Shaivite scriptures, conduct philosophical discourses among the elders of the community, and train the young prior to entering the monastery. They wrote anonymously and spoke through the holes in the walls, never identifying themselves as author or speaker. They were intent on doing their work and doing it well to prepare the population for the coming of the Kali Yuga, and they knew full well that any kind of personality buildup would eliminate them from the opportunities to express the divine and be of service through these trying times as the forces change and the shadows appear on the horizon of another era. Employing the wisdom of celibacy, they were never conscious of physical age so much as the age of the physical body, as well as monastic age, represented wisdom. As the forces of the Kali Yuga drew closer, the fire of the Kundalini rose stronger, and the homes were difficult to maintain in the harmony and serenity of which they knew nothing else for so long. This is because of the desire to perpetuate mating constantly as the earth circles the sun. Though the animal kingdom still mated in season, those in human form do not. This brings into our midst many different types of personalities, and for Shaivite monastic living the practice of cessation of the mating instincts for those who have mated began to occur. This knowledgeable practice of brahmacharya began to come into being as a result of the change of the forces. Each circle of brahmacharya was kept careful track of. Brahmacharya age began at or near the time of the last mating experience, and at the time conscious effort was made to cease the pulsating animal emotional activity of mating and contain within the body what was known as the sacred seed. This seed, when contained, marked circle after circle the vibrating forces of the emotional body of each of these monastics. Seniority, wisdom, humility. Those of great monastic age, physical age, and brahmacharya age had wisdom that was supreme and was regarded as such by all the monastics. But he does not hold himself out as being better because of these accumulated calculations of years. He works even deeper behind the scenes, as a loving parent, helping the younger ones grow in just the right way. Research into developing the astral body. Great research is now being done by those who never mated and are great in brahmacharya, monastics, and physical age. These Shaivites are called Brahmin. This research is in preparation for the coming Kali Yuga, and we found it to be quite necessary to quiet the animal nerve system before the new body in the second world began to develop, as the second world developed around the planet, and could mature unhindered. This constant tearing down, through promiscuous mating, of the second world body was as if someone were constructing a dwelling, and while building one side of it, tearing down the other, so that it would never become a total dwelling place of peace, contentment, and happiness for the soul. Quieting the nerve system. This system being developed is called yoga, and it predominantly is a method for quieting the pulsating forces of the animal nerve system, so the body in the second world can mature and the deeper forces within it, which are called chakras, or spinning discs that motivate the body into the second and into the third world, are again activated in their fullness. This method describes total supplication, dedication, and devotion to the personal deity and to Shiva. Along with the forming of this method, they are making a new language to encompass the laws of it. For the language that we use his little vocabulary to explain the happenings that are occurring now and will be occurring then among the population, as they become more instinctive than the animals are. Our prophets say that this time will repeat itself at the end of the Kali Yuga, when mating will be abundant and the planet will be heavily laden with people, and that this system called yoga will gently lead the greater souls out of the morass as heralds of the Sat-Shiva Yuga. Healing by bhakti and breathing. In the Lemurian times, all going into the inner world and traveling close to the surface of this planet was performed through the night. This new system commands a practice of going within oneself after the devotional mellowing of the forces has been conquered, which is called Bhakti Yoga. It was through sitting straight up with the legs tied in a knot that the slow and tedious practice of inhibiting the breath was performed to feed the body in the second world and heal it, for in many cases it has been torn apart and damaged through the processes of mating in the first and second world. Those who mated much performed these practices for many years and did the most physical of service in the Shaivite monasteries before the body of the second world matured enough to contain itself in the peace and calm of the soul. Duties of the Mohan artisans. When the inner body of the second world repaired itself, the brahmachari became Mohan and was permitted to speak philosophy, and, as artisan, train young apprentices in the same way he had been trained. But he would only do this kind of mental training of his apprentices in the philosophy and other inner practices if he had attained the sanction of his guru, for it was important that his awareness flow perfectly with that of the gurus in order to take on and fulfill such a responsibility. And after many years the Mohan became as a Brahmin, having fully matured, healed, and the living channel of the three worlds. An apprentice only became an artisan if he was moved to another monastery to take over some project there that no one else could handle. But after serving as Mohan artisan for many years, he moved into the temple to serve Shiva and the deities and devas there. Duties of the priestly Brahmins. Our Brahmins are always in charge of the Shiva pedestals. Our Mohans, who became Brahmins, served as helpers at these Shiva pedestals, but are in charge of shrines of other deities. The young Sadaka Brahmin, as soon as he entered the monastery, began helping with the animal population in preparation of prasadam and serving in the temple. It was only after initiation that he was allowed to touch the deity and serve during all the ceremonies as an apprentice. Invocation and worship in samadhi. Our temples at this time conduct 2 times of ceremony. The first is a precise ceremony calling the deities and devas to assist us in our daily activities, to give knowledge and to steady the flow of Shaivite darshan. Secondly is what is called worship in samadhi, a highly simplified ceremony that has never performed during the periodic days through the circle that the deities, Lord Shiva, Skanda, and Ganesha, penetrated most strongly their darshan through the intricate network we have devised to disseminate it. Worship in samadhi was performed when the deity was quiet as self, and the priest who was conducting the ceremony was experiencing self. This was best performed at the time when the darshan was quiescent, hardly felt at all, as quiet water upon a lake. It was during the in-breath of the darshan that the experienced self was best felt, and the slow-moving ceremony performed by the priest in slow motion continued for great lengths of time. On the in-breath of the darshan, the chanting was performed extremely slowly, performing each task perfectly. In developing this new science, yoga, it was found that those who sat straight for meditation could not perform it well, and avoided doing so if they were not perfectly obedient as an apprentice and careful and concise with how they handled their physical body and what they were given by their artisan to do. Therefore, even more than was the custom of our culture, the art forms and our work within the monastery became more and more precise, especially for the brahmachari, for it was found that this concentration of energy, performing physical tasks perfectly, intensified brahmacharya and healed the body of the second world more rapidly toward the mohan state of being. Determining maturation of brahmacharya. It was the deity who told us when a brahmachari became a mohan. For the body in the second world was looked over carefully by him as to its structure, buoyancy, abilities, and the comings and goings within the different areas of the second world, which were carefully observed. Therefore, the perfecting of the skill and being able to convey it to another who worked by the side of the artisan is only the first qualification. For to be fully accomplished, he must be astute philosophically, have a mature body in the second world, and the grace of his guru to convey the deeper skills of philosophy and some of the practices of yoga that are just now beginning to be tested out in our monasteries to the apprentices. Special skills from the hub of culture. All Shaivite monastics have always prided themselves on their skills, as did the Lemurians. This was the hub of our culture that monastics are dedicated to preserve. From mental skills to the dissemination of the darshan to the base physical accomplishment, all these are carefully taught our young brahmacharis and brahmin alike. It was to be in the Kali Yuga that these skills would be forgotten, and men would live an entire lifetime within a body performing poorly every action. But now, our skills and power of concentration in acquiring these skills move us powerfully into maturity in the second world and away from this planet after self is realized and this physical body is needed no more. Many of our artisans matured in all worlds continue their training in the third world, ordaining new innovations for the population to enjoy. These beings are always easy to recognize because of their great skill and enthusiasm, ability to train others, and produce on the physical plane what they have pulled through from the third world. Duties of Sadaka artisans. Sometimes sadakas were artisans and had initiated monastics under them as apprentices. When this occurred, the sadaka did not train any of the monastics in their personal behavior, nor did he give them philosophy, even if he were able and well qualified to do so. Usually it was the artisan who was responsible for the personal behavior and training of his apprentices, but for the sadakas who were not initiated, there was always a Brahmin assigned to help, or a Mohan who had become Brahmin, in this area of philosophical training and personal behavior, the working together of three worlds. It was due to the flexibility of our culture, guided by the devas of the third and second world working so closely with us as if they were also in the first world, and we who closely with them through our days as if we lived in the second world and not in the first, that the great lords of the third world were able to send great shafts of divine light and cosmic rays and new innovations and inspiration with the stabilization of all mankind through these many thousands of Shaivite monasteries, which toward the end of this yuga are more and more becoming the only hub of culture which is looked to by the populace as the stability of the race and the tradition. High stone walls protected the monasteries. Those who sought admittance sat for long periods there, humbly begging entrance. Expert Devonic guards watched over the process, and it was to them that seekers prayed for permission to enter. Monastics passing by on journey to another monastery sat by the wall, facing out, for short periods. They were lovingly served prasadam as they basked in the sunlight and darshan. It is by the wall that the destiny of the birth karmas of each was evaluated. The gurus and senior minority group considered well who, why, and when one entered. While one was admitted, another was sent here, and another there. All this was preceded by thoughtful study of their patterns of behavior and accomplishments since entering the first wall as young novitiates. All quelling worry about the future, people in these days were well organized and happy, having evolved a sustainable life. This chapter explains how those monks who had mated ate fresh vegetables, which when mixed with oils and herbs healed every illness. Many strict rules govern the massive walls around their monasteries, providing physical as well as psychic protection against intruders. Gurudeva. Chapter 17, The Monastery Wall. Brahmachari family elders of our communities train the young men for sadaka life in our monasteries and come to live with us as sadaka themselves a certain amount of time each year to acquire the strength and direction for the mission of training the young Brahmins. These young Brahmins, when they entered the monastery, were not required to practice any austerities such as the brahmachari who entered at a later age were given to do. Their greatest austerity was living away from home. Their families were so attached, and the umbilical-like psychic odic tubes connecting the young Brahmin Sadaka to his mother did not dispel themselves until his full physical maturity of about 24 years of age occurred. How unique Shaivite groups will form. Our prophets tell us that in the Kali Yuga, great austerities will be performed, and the groups that perform them will each centralize on a different aspect of Shaivism. Each aspect will form its own particular group in the second world to assist those in the first world governing it. The aspects will have different names and sometimes fight with each other. If all of the austerities were the same, everyone would be the same, but the changing forces of the Kali Yuga will not permit this. This Yuga is ruthless in its way, and the one great austerity will be for us all, our third world deity states, to live completely through it and come forth triumphantly into the Sat-Shiva Yuga. Diminishing psychic tubes. Though our diet followed closely that of the Lemurian monasteries, the brahmacharis who mated much with many different ones that ordinarily would not have been entered into the monastery, but for the fact that too few were inclined to enter at all, varied their diet from Lemurian prasadam to entering spacious gardens of the monastery and picking their herbs and vegetables that grew above the ground and eating them a short time thereafter. It was found that by pick and eat, the actual life force of the growing plant was taken into the body. This revitalized the physical body, and in doing so helped to diminish the pulls of the psychic tubes connecting to each one they had mated with. This revitalization, along with sunshine on the outside of the body, the practice of aloneness and inhibiting the speech, withered away the psychic entanglements that devitalized the physical body and inhibited the second world body from healing. Picking and eating. Each of these different kinds of herbs and the vegetables should be eaten with the time it takes to pick them. Dip them in spiced oils which are carried in a little gourd in one hand, and place them in the mouth, one piece at a time. The posture for picking and eating in this way was that of sitting on one's heels with the knees up underneath the arms, which freed the digestive tract and aided in the intestinal flow. The other position was sitting on the heels and knees. The morsel picked, dipped in spiced oil, and placed in the mouth, not too rapidly, yet not too slowly, was chewed thoroughly, and a mental effort made to lift the life force of the growing plant up into the head. This form of eating was usually performed just before the setting sun, after the green morsels and vegetables had absorbed the sun's rays all through the day. There was usually enough sun left to hit upon the body and open the pores so that the sun's rays, simultaneous with the life force within the plant, would meet and merge. No nourishment was ever taken when it was too dark to see to move around and do the things that one did when it was light. It was considered quite a treat if one were to pick and eat just after a gentle rain, or if it rained gently during that time. Herbs for every ailment. Our spiced oil in which each morsel was dipped was flavored with herbs, sometimes hot substances that invigorated the body. All who practiced this sadhana became so in tune with scientific physicians in the second world that they began to know the exact quantity of the different kinds of herbs and vegetables to be eaten for their families, to be eaten for their ailments or for the continuation of their vibrant health. These devas of our gardens were well schooled in assisting the brahmacharis to loosen themselves from psychic entanglements and mental foes, for they were so needed when they became Brahmin again in our temples. Many a sadhaka brahmachari is inwardly instructed in dreams by the devas as to what to grow in his own circle of nourishment, in the center of which he sits on a small board with spiced oils in one hand, picking and eating as the sun's rays penetrate his back or chest and head. The wall in the first and second worlds. The walls around our monasteries were high and well protected by Devonic guards in our second world. It was only through the admittance first into the second world could someone seeking permanent residency be admitted. Those monastics and newcomers seeking to become monastics sat by the wall on the outside of it, and were observed as to their comings and goings as they slept at night quite carefully by our inner order of devas in the second world, begging admittance as a resident. The monastics traveling from one monastery to another often returned to the monastery that they came from at night during their sleep. Until this ceased, they were not allowed in ours. It was only when during their sleeping hours they sought entrance and then were first entered into the second world with blessings and sanction from the third that our senior minority group was allowed to take them into the first. We have to be extremely strict in entering new monastics, and some stay by the wall many moons and are seen there chanting, in conversation with the second world, begging admittance, telling the second world inner order what they will do for the monastery, how well they will carry the darshan if given the privilege to do it, giving their qualifications and trying to blend their inner force with that of the monastery itself. Not begging entrance. There are two kinds of monastics who sit by the wall, one actually seeking admittance, and the others who simply are passing by from one monastery to the other, who stop and rest a while for taking of nourishment and darshan. They distinguish themselves in two ways. Those begging admittance into the monastery from the second world governing body of devas are seen sitting or standing close to the wall, facing the wall, chanting and mentally talking with the devas, asking for help and support in early entry. Those who are just passers-by are seen standing or sitting with their back against the wall, facing the countryside, chanting and talking one with another, basking in the sunlight, the darshan, and enjoying the prasadam that is served at regular intervals. They may sing songs telling of their journeys and the activities of the monastery that they came from, and the ones they're going to, and courteously and completely ignores those facing the wall. Conversing with those by the wall. Only one member of the senior minority group speaks with them, sees to their needs, and is arbitrator between them and the senior minority group and the second world devas. Other monastics who are permanent residents going and coming from the monastery, who are not in the senior minority group, stop and talk with them, telling them how welcome they are, what a fine monastery it is, and how happy they will be. They assure them that they hope the second world devas will allow them entrance through the senior minority group at an early time, when their comings and goings during their sleep are minimal and centralized around the particular monastery they are trying to enter. The second world devas, of course, begin to take them seriously, knowing full well that once they enter they will work with them as they sleep, and not escape through sleep from the monastery, bringing back opposing forces from the exterior world, and having to go through the harassment of meeting the demonic guards of the wall and the severe tapas that would have to be imposed to quell this mental and second world behavior. The wall's fierce demonic guards. Our great walls are established as psychic barriers as well. The guards in the second world torment an intruder many months after his intrusion, and he'd know full well not to enter unbidden again. These guards are strong and fierce, well trained, and in the second world itself. It is not uncommon that second world devas would allow a sadhaka to enter because perhaps he was sent by the guru, but the guards would oppose this as they could see, even though he did not travel at night away from the monastery, his vibration around him and through him did not enhance the vibration of the monastery, but was different from it, so the guards would be seen growling and objecting to the entrance. The second world devas would be seen standing on the opposite side of the wall facing him, and the sadhaka facing them, the wall in between. They would chant to him, begging him to adjust his atmosphere so that he could enter and the guru's wishes be fulfilled. Keeping an arm's length apart. Occasionally more senior monastics could come to the wall, face it, and talk through it of deep philosophy and of travels into other galaxies to the sadhakas facing the wall, to educate them prior to their entrance as to the current research, function, and activity of the inner part of the monastery they were seeking entrance into. When a speech began from a monastery on one side of the wall, many of those on the other side seeking entrance were seen crowding around the niche in the wall to listen. They observed our protocol of never standing closer to one another than a distance of one arm raised by each of them, fingers touching, or 2 arms length apart. This kept the shell around the aura touching, and the auras did not intermingle, thus draining force from one to another, inhibiting the divine work. Each one of us in these monasteries has to during these trying times when the Kali Yuga is imminent. Its shadows are seen in the distance within the inner mind. Wars in the second and first world. Our prophets are alive with their factual information as to how the Kali Yuga will cease our travels off this planet into this galaxy and to the next. They tell how this planet will be isolated through the Kali Yuga, and that at times within the second world around it there will be great wars between the people of conflicting forces, and at other times in the first world similar forces will conflict, sending those there into the second world rapidly, that at times there will be more in the second world than the first, but toward the end of the Yuga more in the first world than the second. And it will only be then that greater souls from other galaxies and this will be able to come to the second world of this planet, live, and help make the adjustments in the second and in the first world that will be necessary at that time to bring the Sat Shiva Yuga into fulfillment. Guarding sacred sites. Our prophets tell us that long after our monasteries cease to exist, even through the Kali Yuga, our well-trained demonic guards will protect the same areas, harassing and tormenting all intruders, and that only through secret mantra codes will former monastics of our time be allowed to enter those areas with no confrontation from the guard of the wall. They further say that all residents of the particular monastery that they are guarding will be allowed to come and go over that area of earth, even at the end of the Kali Yuga, without torment or entanglement, mental and emotional frustrations that these powerful gods, as they will be called in those days, can accomplish in protecting the great darshan flow generated by each of our monasteries, and held fast to the earth through it and hooked into a mountain on the other side.